You probably think that if a doctor prescribed it, it must be FDA approved. But if you get your medication from an online telemedicine company, well, there's a good chance that it's not. Today, we're going to talk about the warning letters that companies like Hims and Blue Chew received from the Food and Drug Administration about this very issue. I'm going to explain why telemedicine companies often offer products in what are basically a legal gray zone. I'm going to explain what on-patent drugs are, what off-patent drugs are, what compounded drugs are as well. You're going to be an expert on this by the end of this short video. And I own a telemedicine company, which makes me the very best person on YouTube to talk about this. As a matter of fact, I read these letters from the FDA, and we should have gotten one as well. The only reason we didn't is because we're just so small the FDA doesn't even know we exist. I'm Robert from Shameless Scare. Let's get right into it. Now, you should know that when a drug manufacturer like Pfizer with Viagra develops a drug, that drug is given a patent. And that patent typically lasts for about 20 years. Unfortunately, the FDA approval process can take about 10 years. And so essentially, drug companies have about 10 years to profit, hopefully wildly, from these new drugs that they develop. And in the case of Pfizer and Viagra, they definitely profited really quite well. Now, after that patent expires, then other companies can offer that medication as a generic. So what I have right here is sildenafil, which is the active ingredient in Viagra, but it's offered as a generic. Now, you're already familiar with these. Think of acetaminophen and Tylenol. You're very comfortable with the idea of generic medication. So that's that process, and what you need to understand are on-patent medications and generic medications, both approved by the FDA. What you may not be familiar with are compounded medications. For example, this is one that we offer at shamelesscare.com. It doesn't matter what the drug is. I'm just going to explain what compounded medications are. Now, compounding pharmacies are pharmacies that do a couple of things. Just to put it in two buckets here so it's easy for everybody to understand, they do two things. One is they can bootleg and copy drugs that are on patent if the FDA declares a shortage. So those of you who might be on semiglutide, which is basically the active ingredient in Ozempic and these sorts of drugs that are on patent, if you bought that from a Hims or Hers or some other telemedicine company, then that's what you got. You got what is basically a legal bootleg. And I don't mean to use the word bootleg as if it's illegal. It was perfectly legal because the FDA declared a shortage. So if there's a drug that doctors are prescribing all across the United States, but the drug manufacturer literally cannot keep up with demand, then the FDA allows compounding pharmacies to make copies of it. And you can imagine how critically important this is. Let's say, for example, there was a life-saving cancer drug that everyone agrees can save lives, but the manufacturer who owns the patent just literally cannot keep up with demand. So that's why those laws exist. There was an FDA-declared shortage on Ozempic. Compounding pharmacies across the country took advantage of that and made that medication, which that shortage is now declared over. And so that production has had to cease. But I'm just giving you an example of one thing that compounding pharmacies do. The other thing that compounding pharmacies do, and I've always found the best example to come from veterinary medicine. Okay, let's say that your cat or your dog or whatever your pet is needs a particular type of medication. Let's say it's an allergy medication, but your cat, dog, whatever, doesn't want to take the medication. Well, you can have a compounding veterinary pharmacy take that active ingredient and maybe put it in like a tuna roll or something like that that your animal will eat. That's an example of a compounded medication where you take an active ingredient and you mix it in with other things. Sometimes you can even mix multiple active ingredients together into the same thing. And that's what this is. This is sildenafil and tadalafil. So those are two basic things that compounding pharmacies do. But what's critically important to understand is that compounded medications cannot be FDA approved and therefore are not FDA approved. And that's true even if it looks like it comes in the form of a capsule, because there are 503A compounding pharmacies and 503B compounding pharmacies. 503B makes things in bulk, like oftentimes, tablets. If you think about Blue Chew, very successful company, they sell what I'm guessing are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of doses a month of ED medication. That probably comes from, I'm guessing, a 503B compounding pharmacy. But nonetheless, because it comes from a compounding pharmacy, it cannot be FDA approved, and it is not FDA approved. So now to further explain this issue, I'm going to share with you the FDA warning letter that was sent to Blue Chew. All right. This is from the Food and Drug Administration. It's posted on the Food and Drug Administration's website. The lines on Blue Chew's website that the FDA took offense to was a line that says same active ingredient as Viagra. Another line, same active ingredient as Cialis. A third line, the chewable tablets offered through Blue Chew work for most patients. They are compounded medications made with the same active ingredients, sildenafil, tadalafil, etc., used in Food and Drug Administration approved erection-enhancing medications such as Viagra and Cialis. Now, I'm going to read a little bit further down in this letter so you can see the FDA's point. Compounded drugs are not FDA approved. Your claims imply that your products are the same as FDA approved products when they are not. And it goes on to say, therefore, this is misleading. Look, the drugs that HEM sells that are compounded drugs, the drugs that Blue Chew sells, the drugs that we sell at Shameless Care are not FDA approved. At least the compounded versions, we sell generic sildenafil and tadalafil that are, but compounded drugs are not. The problem is those drugs are completely safe. And yes, they cannot be FDA approved, but that does not mean that they're dangerous. It's just that compounded drugs cannot be FDA approved. Because look, this is literally made by a pharmacist in a pharmacy to order. The FDA cannot be looking over the shoulder and seeing what this pharmacy makes in every single case, but it's a licensed pharmacist and a licensed pharmacy and so on and so forth. You get the idea, right? Cannot be FDA approved. The difficulty is it's very hard to explain what these medications are without talking about their origination. Sildenafil is the active ingredient in Viagra. That's where it comes from. But the FDA does not want it explained that way because in its view, you're comparing the two. You're saying that this compounded sildenafil is the same as Viagra, and it's not. Even though you could certainly make the case that it is. Because it's the active ingredient, it's just off patent now and available as a generic. So I hope that explains a lot of things on patent drugs, off patent drugs, generic drugs, compounded drugs, and why compounded medications cannot be FDA approved and therefore are not FDA approved. I'm Robert from Shameless Care. Thank you so much.